The morning sun shone through the tall windows of the Capitol building as staff members hurried through the marble hallways. It was Tuesday, and the committee hearing that everyone had been talking about for weeks was finally happening. The hearing room slowly filled with people. Journalists set up their cameras and notebooks. Aides whispered to each other as they arranged papers and water bottles. Senator Marco Rubio arrived 15 minutes early. He wore a navy blue suit and a red tie. His face showed no worry as he greeted several colleagues with handshakes and brief smiles. His chief aide, Peter Harris, walked close behind him carrying a thick folder of documents. They took their seats at the long wooden table facing the room. Peter leaned over and whispered something to Rubio, who nodded slightly without changing his expression. "Senator, are you prepared for Representative Crockett today?" asked George Wilson, a reporter who had managed to get close to the table before security moved him back. "I'm here to discuss policy that helps the American people," Rubio answered calmly. "That's always my focus." On the other side of the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett entered with her team. She wore a bright yellow blazer that stood out among the sea of dark suits. Her assistant, Melissa Jones, carried several binders and a tablet. Crockett walked with confidence, stopping to speak with supporters and fellow representatives. Her voice carried across the room as she laughed at something Congressman Carl Bennett said to her. "She's ready for this," Melissa told another aide. "We've been preparing all weekend." The gallery seats above the hearing floor were packed with spectators. Regular citizens sat next to political staffers and lobbyists. Everyone wanted to witness what many news shows had been calling the confrontation of the month. Social media was already buzzing with predictions and commentary. At exactly 10:02 a.m., Committee Chairman John Miller called the room to order. His gavel bang echoed through the suddenly quiet space. He was an older man with gray hair and glasses who had served in Congress for over 20 years. People respected him for his fairness, though today would test his ability to maintain order. "This committee meeting will come to order," he announced in his deep voice. "Today we continue our discussion on government ethics and accountability. I remind everyone that we will maintain decorum at all times. The official purpose of the hearing was to discuss new ethics guidelines for government officials, but everyone knew the real focus would be on former President Trump and the accusations surrounding his business dealings while in office. For weeks, Crockett had been making strong statements on news programs about what she called clear corruption that had gone unpunished. Rubio had defended the former president, but had been more measured in his responses, saying only that facts matter more than accusations. Nancy Walsh, a veteran reporter for the National Daily, scribbled notes as the chairman went through opening formalities. She had covered politics for 25 years and recognized the signs of an important political moment about to unfold. She noticed how Rubio seemed relaxed while Crockett kept checking her notes and whispering to Melissa. The first hour of the hearing proceeded with standard questions and statements from various committee members. Some focused on the actual policy, proposals, while others made political points for the cameras. The room grew warmer as time passed, and staffers occasionally slipped out for coffee or quick phone calls. During a brief recess, Susan Garcia, another of Crockett's aides, handed her a folder with highlighted sections. "These are the strongest points against him," she said quietly. "The financial records from 2018 are particularly damning." Crockett nodded, reviewing the papers with intense focus. "He won't have answers for these," she replied. Across the room, Rubio conferred with Peter and another aide named Kyle Brown. They appeared to be reviewing document after document, with Rubio pointing to specific sections and nodding as Kyle explained something. Unlike the animated conversation at Crockett's table, Rubio's discussion seemed calm and methodical. When Chairman Miller called the session back to order, the energy in the room had changed. People sat up straighter. Phones were put away. Everyone could sense that the preliminary discussions were over and the real confrontation was about to begin. "The chair now recognizes Representative Crockett for 10 minutes, Miller announced. Crockett stood and adjusted her microphone. She thanked the chairman and began with a brief statement about the importance of government ethics. Then her tone shifted. "We cannot talk about ethics without addressing the elephant in the room," she said, her voice growing stronger. "For years, Certain colleagues have defended actions that any ordinary citizen would recognize as corrupt. She turned slightly toward Rubio's side of the table. Senator Rubio has repeatedly defended a former president whose business dealings while in office represent one of the clearest examples of corruption we've seen in modern politics. Cameras clicked rapidly as photographers captured Rubio's expression, which remained neutral. Peter Harris passed him a note, which he glanced at before setting it aside. Crockett continued, "The American people deserve better than these defenses of the indefensible. The evidence shows a clear pattern of corrupt behavior that Senator Rubio and others continue to ignore." She held up several documents. These financial records show hotel properties receiving millions from foreign governments while decisions favorable to those governments were being made. This is corruption, plain and simple. As Crockett spoke, the room temperature seemed to rise. Some committee members nodded in agreement while others frowned or wrote notes. In the gallery, supporters from both sides watched intently. A man in a red tie whispered too loudly, "She's got him now," causing several people to turn and look at him. Chairman Miller had to tap his gavel once when audience members began to murmur too loudly. "The gallery will remain silent," he reminded everyone. Crockett's voice grew more passionate as she continued presenting what she called evidence of corruption. She cited specific dates, amounts of money, and policy decisions that she claimed were connected. Her yellow blazer seemed even brighter under the lights as she moved with energy, pointing occasionally toward Rubio's side of the table. "And yet, Senator Rubio tells us there's nothing to see here," she said, her voice rising slightly. "The American people know better. They understand what corruption looks like, even if some of my colleagues pretend not to see it." As she neared the end of her allotted time, Crockett addressed Rubio directly for the first time. "Senator, I wonder how you continue to defend these actions when the evidence is so clear. At what point does loyalty to a person override loyalty to our country and its laws?" The question hung in the air as her time expired. Chairman Miller thanked her and announced, "The chair now recognizes Senator Rubio for 10 minutes. The room fell completely silent as Rubio slowly stood. He took a sip of water and adjusted his papers without rushing. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured, creating a stark contrast to Crockett's passionate delivery. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," he began. "I appreciate the opportunity to respond to my colleagues' colorful interpretations of events." He paused, looking directly at Crockett for the first time. The cameras captured the moment as the two politicians locked eyes across the table. The gallery held its collective breath, waiting for what would come next. Marco Rubio stood at the microphone, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the room. He arranged his papers neatly and looked up at the committee members and then toward Jasmine Crockett. "My colleague has made some serious accusations today," Rubio began, his voice steady and clear. "She has used strong words like corruption and indefensible. These are big claims that demand solid evidence, not just passionate speeches." Crockett sat back in her chair, her yellow blazer bright under the hearing room lights. Her aide Melissa leaned over and whispered something, but Crockett shook her head slightly, her eyes fixed on Rubio. "Let me address each point that Representative Crockett raised," Rubio continued. He picked up the first document from his pile. "She mentioned hotel properties receiving money from foreign governments. What she failed to mention was the complete investigation conducted by the Ethics Committee in 2019. Rubio held up a report with an official seal. This report, which I'm sure my colleague has read, concluded that all business transactions followed proper protocols. The money paid was at standard market rates for services rendered, not special favors. In the gallery, Nancy Walsh, the veteran reporter, wrote quickly in her notebook. She noticed how Rubio was not raising his voice or showing anger, but instead methodically addressing each point with documents to support his statements. Furthermore, Rubio said, turning a page in the report, the claim that policy decisions were influenced by these standard business transactions has been investigated multiple times by both congressional committees and independent counsel. No evidence of wrongdoing was found. Chairman Miller nodded slightly as Rubio spoke. The room remained quiet except for the occasional camera click. Peter Harris passed another document to Rubio, who glanced at it briefly before continuing. My Colleague mentioned specific dates and amounts of money. Rubio said, "Let's look at those in context." He pulled out a timeline chart and held it up. On January 15, 2018, the date Representative Crockett highlighted, the policy decision she referenced had already been in development for 8 months, with documentation from the State Department proving this timeline. Crockett frowned and quickly flipped through her own notes. Melissa showed her something on a tablet, pointing urgently at the screen. Crockett's confident expression began to fade slightly as she reviewed the information. "What troubles me most," Rubio continued, his tone remaining professional, "is not that we disagree on policy. Disagreement is healthy in a democracy. What troubles me is the rush to claim corruption without examining all the facts." He turned to address Crockett directly. "You asked at what point loyalty to a person overrides loyalty to our country and its laws. I would ask you, at what point does political opposition override commitment to truth and fairness?" A slight murmur ran through the gallery. Chairman Tabiumsiar Miller tapped his gavel once to maintain order. Rubio held up another document. "This is the full transcript of the meeting Representative Crockett partially quoted. Reading just the complete sentence shows a very different meaning than what was suggested." He read the full quote, which put the former president's comments in a context that seemed much more appropriate than how Crockett had presented them. Several committee members nodded as they followed along with copies that Kyle Brown was now distributing. Susan Garcia, Crockett's aide, whispered urgently to her boss. Crockett's face showed growing concern as she compared the full transcript to her notes. She began writing quickly on a legal pad, preparing for her response time. "I have always said that we should follow the facts wherever they lead us," Rubio continued. "I have never claimed any person is above criticism or investigation. What I object to is making accusations first and looking for evidence later." In the gallery, George Wilson from Channel 8 News leaned toward another reporter and whispered. Rubio came prepared. "This isn't going how Crockett expected." Rubio moved to his next point. Representative Crockett mentioned foreign government officials staying at hotel properties. Again, the context matters. During the same time period, these same officials stayed at many different hotel chains across Washington. This was standard practice for diplomatic visits, not special treatment. He displayed a chart showing hotel bookings by foreign delegations across Washington, D.C. during the years in question. The data clearly showed that the former president's hotels received only a small percentage of these bookings compared to other major hotel chains. "Facts matter," Rubio said firmly. "When we ignore context and selected evidence to fit a predetermined narrative, we do a disservice to the American people who deserve the complete truth." As Rubio continued his methodical response, Crockett appeared increasingly uncomfortable. She whispered with her team, reviewing documents and shaking her head at times. The confidence she had shown earlier was visibly diminishing as Rubio addressed each of her points with evidence and context. "Now, regarding the claim about favorable decisions being made for certain countries," Rubio said, moving to his final point, "let's examine the actual policy outcomes." He displayed a list of actions taken toward the countries Crockett had mentioned. Far from receiving favorable treatment, these nations actually faced increased sanctions, tougher trade negotiations, and more stringent diplomatic requirements during this period. These facts directly contradict the narrative of special treatment in exchange for hotel bookings. Several journalists in the press section were rapidly typing on their laptops. The story was clearly developing differently than many had anticipated. Nancy Walsh looked up from her notes and studied Crockett's face, noting how her expression had changed since the beginning of Rubio's response. "In conclusion," Rubio said as he neared the end of his allotted time, "I believe we can have strong disagreements about policy without resorting to accusations of corruption. The American people deserve debates based on complete information, not selective facts presented without context." He gathered his papers and looked directly at Crockett. "Again, I respect my colleague's passion for government ethics. I share that passion, but passion must be guided by facts and fairness, not just political differences." As Rubio finished speaking, the room remained quiet for a moment. Chairman Miller cleared his throat before speaking. "Thank you, Senator Rubio. Representative Crockett, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal. Crockett stood slowly, her earlier energy noticeably diminished. She adjusted her microphone and took a deep breath. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she began, her voice less confident than before. Senator Rubio has presented his interpretation of these events, and I appreciate his thoroughness. She shuffled through her papers, looking for the right document. Melissa quickly handed her a folder, but Crockett seemed unsure which points to address first. The report the senator referenced does acknowledge the foreign payments to hotel properties, she said, attempting to regain her footing. While the Ethics Committee found no direct evidence of wrongdoing, many questions remain unanswered. Rubio sat calmly, listening attentively as she spoke. Peter Harris passed him a note, which he read quickly before returning his attention to Crockett. As for the timeline the senator presented, Crockett continued, there are still concerns about the acceleration of certain policy decisions that coincided with these business transactions. Her rebuttal lacked the certainty and passion of her earlier statements. In the gallery, supporters who had nodded vigorously during her initial presentation now sat quietly, some looking down at their phones. The American people still have legitimate concerns about the appearance of conflicts of interest, she said, trying to find stronger ground. Even if no laws were broken, the appearance of impropriety matters in public service. Chairman Miller checked his watch as Crockett's rebuttal time ticked away. The hearing room, which had been so charged with energy earlier, now felt subdued. The confrontation that many had expected to be a defining moment for Crockett had instead become a showcase for Rubio's measured, evidence-based approach. As her time neared its end, Crockett made one final attempt to regain momentum. We may disagree on interpretations, but the importance of high ethical standards remains something we should all support. Thank you, Representative, Chairman Miller said as her time expired. We will now move to questions from committee members. The committee room buzzed with quiet whispers as Chairman Miller called on the first committee member for questions. Representative Daniel Scott, a senior member from Ohio, adjusted his glasses and leaned toward his microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Scott said. Senator Rubio, you mentioned the Ethics Committee report from 2019. Could you elaborate on who conducted that investigation and how thorough it was? Rubio nodded and selected a document from his organized stack. The investigation was conducted by a bipartisan team of 6 committee members, 3 from each party. They reviewed over 10,000 pages of financial records, conducted 47 interviews, and spent 8 months examining every transaction in question. Scott nodded, taking notes. And Representative Crockett, are you familiar with this report? Crockett shifted in her seat. Yes, I've reviewed it, but I believe the scope was too limited. They didn't examine certain international connections. The report explicitly states on page 217 that international business connections were thoroughly investigated. Rubio interjected calmly, holding up the relevant page. Including those in 12 different countries that Representative Crockett has mentioned in her public statements. Melissa quickly passed Crockett a copy of the report with several sticky notes marking pages. Crockett flipped through it, trying to find the section Rubio referenced. Moving on, said Scott. I'd like to ask about the timeline of policy decisions that both of you mentioned. For the next 20 minutes, committee members took turns asking questions. Most directed their inquiries to both Rubio and Crockett, creating a back and forth that increasingly favored Rubio's command of the details. His responses were quick and specific, often citing page numbers from reports or exact dates of meetings. Crockett, meanwhile, spoke in more general terms, sometimes needing to confer with her aides before answering. Representative Lisa Freeman, a first-term member known for her direct style, addressed Crockett. You stated earlier that there were clear examples of corruption. Can you point to any specific finding in any official report that uses the word corruption or concludes that laws were broken? Crockett hesitated. The reports use terms like concerning patterns and potential conflicts of interest. While they may not use the specific word, so no official report has actually found corruption, Freeman interrupted. Is that correct? The technical finding doesn't capture the full picture, Crockett replied, her voice showing frustration. Sometimes we need to read between the lines. Reading between the lines isn't the same as evidence, Freeman noted. Senator Rubio, same question to you. Rubio responded without hesitation. No official investigation, including those conducted by opposing political parties, has found corruption or criminal wrongdoing in these matters. That's simply a fact, regardless of anyone's political preferences. In the gallery, reporters typed furiously on their laptops. Nancy Walsh paused her typing and observed how the mood in the room had shifted. What had begun as Crockett's moment to shine had turned into a showcase of Rubio's detailed knowledge and measured responses. The questioning continued with Representative Joe Martinez, who directed his inquiry to Rubio. Senator, Representative, Crockett suggested that hotel bookings influenced foreign policy. What evidence exists to support or refute this claim? Rubio nodded to Kyle, who distributed a new document to committee members. This analysis tracks every major foreign policy decision regarding the 5 countries in question during the time period. As you can see from the highlighted sections, 23 decisions went against these countries' interests, while only 4 were favorable. If hotel bookings were influencing policy, we would expect to see the opposite pattern. Martinez reviewed the document and turned to Crockett. Representative, do you have data that contradicts this analysis? Crockett consulted with Susan, who shook her head slightly. We have concerns about how these decisions are being categorized as favorable or unfavorable. The methodology seems biased. The methodology was developed by the Nonpartisan Foreign Policy Institute, Rubio noted. The same methodology they've used to analyze foreign policy decisions across 3 different administrations. Chairman Miller checked the time. We have time for one more round of questions before we conclude this portion of the hearing. The final questioner was Representative Greg Howard, a veteran legislator respected by both parties. He looked first at Crockett. Representative, given the evidence presented today, would you like to clarify or modify any of your earlier statements about corruption? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Crockett, who took a sip of water while considering her response. Her bright yellow blazer seemed less vibrant now under the hearing room lights. I stand by my concerns about the appearance of impropriety, she said carefully, noticeably avoiding the word corruption she had used so freely earlier. While Senator Rubio has presented his interpretation of events, the American people deserve continued vigilance on ethics matters. Howard nodded and turned to Rubio. Senator, what lessons do you think we should take from this discussion today? Rubio straightened in his chair. I think the main lesson is that serious accusations require serious evidence. We can disagree about policies without questioning each other's integrity or motives. The American people deserve debates based on facts, not insinuations. Howard nodded thoughtfully. Thank you both, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time. Chairman Miller tapped his gavel. We'll take a 15-minute recess before continuing with the next panel. As people began to stand and stretch, the energy in the room changed. Journalists hurried out to file their stories, and staffers gathered around both Rubio and Crockett. The contrast between the two groups was striking. Rubio's team appeared calm and satisfied, while Crockett's aides wore concerned expressions. Outside in the hallway, reporters surrounded Rubio as he left the committee room. Senator, did you anticipate the direction this hearing would take? Asked George Wilson from Channel 8 News. I came prepared to discuss facts, Rubio replied simply. That's always my approach. Further down the hall, Crockett declined to speak with the press. The representative has no comment at this time, Melissa told the gathered journalists as they rushed Crockett toward the elevator. Nancy Walsh watched the scene unfold as she spoke quietly into her phone, dictating notes to her editor. The hearing that was expected to put Rubio on the defensive instead revealed the weakness in Crockett's claims. Her accusations of corruption collapsed under scrutiny when faced with Rubio's command of the facts. Back in the committee room, Chairman Miller spoke with his staff. That didn't go as expected, he commented quietly. No, sir, his chief aide replied. Rubio came with receipts, as the young people say. In a small side room, Crockett met urgently with her team. Why didn't we have the page numbers ready? Why didn't we anticipate his response on the timeline? Her voice was tense with frustration. "We didn't expect him to have such specific rebuttals," Susan admitted. "We thought he would speak in generalities that we could challenge." "Well, he didn't," Crockett said, removing her yellow blazer. "He had documents for everything. We need to regroup before I make any more public statements on this." Meanwhile, Rubio sat calmly in another room, reviewing notes with Peter and Kyle. "I think we addressed everything thoroughly," he said. "Any points we should reinforce in the press conference later?" "The timeline was particularly effective," Peter suggested. "The way you showed that the policy was already in development months before the hotel bookings really undermined her central claim." Rubio nodded. "Let's focus on that then. And remember, we stick to the facts. No personal attacks on Representative Crockett. This isn't about her, it's about getting the record straight." As the recess neared its end, the mood throughout the Capitol had shifted. What had begun as a highly anticipated confrontation that many expected would damage Rubio had instead become a moment that raised serious questions about Crockett's claims and approach. The story developing in newsrooms and on social media was not the one that had been anticipated that morning. The second half of the hearing would begin soon, but in many ways, the most important exchanges had already happened. The detailed evidence Rubio presented had changed the narrative, leaving Crockett struggling to defend accusations that had seemed so solid just hours earlier. The 15-minute recess stretched to 20 as staff members hurried back and forth between offices, bringing new documents and updated talking points. Outside the committee room, a crowd had grown as word spread about the unexpected turn of events. Regular citizens mixed with political staffers, all eager to witness the rest of the hearing. When Chairman Miller finally called the session back to order, several committee members who had stepped out for calls rushed back to their seats. The room quickly fell silent as Miller spoke. "Before we continue with our next panel of witnesses, I want to address an important matter," Miller said, his voice firm. "Senator Rubio has requested time to present additional evidence related to claims made earlier. Representative Crockett has agreed to this request. Senator Rubio, you have 5 minutes." Rubio stood and thanked the chairman. During the break, he had removed his suit jacket, and his red tie stood out against his white shirt. He seemed even more relaxed now, like someone who knew he was on solid ground. "Mr. Chairman, during our recess, my staff received several important documents that directly address Representative Crockett's earlier claims," Rubio began. "I believe it's important to enter these into the record now." Kyle handed a stack of papers to the committee clerk, who began distributing copies to members. Rubio held up his copy for the room to see. "This first document is a complete foreign visitor log from the hotel properties in question. It shows that during the time period Representative Crockett highlighted, government officials from the countries she mentioned spent more nights at 3 other hotel chains than at the properties she focused on." Crockett leaned forward, studying the document as it was placed before her. Melissa whispered in her ear, but Crockett shook her head, clearly seeing something in the numbers that troubled her. "The second document," Rubio continued, "is a letter from the head of the Ethics Committee responding to questions about their investigation. It specifically addresses the concern that Representative Crockett raised about limited scope." He read from the letter, "Our investigation examined all financial transactions, communications, and policy decisions related to these matters. No avenue of inquiry was off limits, and no evidence of wrongdoing was found." In the gallery, George Wilson nudged a fellow reporter and whispered, "That's signed by Senator Morris, White, that from Crockett's own party." Rubio moved to his third point. "Finally, I want to address the timeline question more clearly." He displayed a chart showing a chronology of events. The policy decisions that Representative Crockett linked to hotel bookings were already in progress months before the bookings occurred, making it impossible for one to have influenced the other. As Rubio methodically presented each piece of evidence, the mood in the room continued to shift. Even committee members who typically aligned with Crockett appeared concerned by the clear contradiction of her earlier claims. "In conclusion," Rubio said as his time neared its end, "I believe the record now clearly shows that the accusations of corruption are not supported by evidence. I thank the committee for allowing me to present these additional materials. Chairman Miller nodded. Thank you, Senator. Representative Crockett, you have 5 minutes to respond. Crockett stood slowly. Her bright yellow blazer was back on, but her earlier confidence had not returned. She straightened her papers and took a deep breath. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she began. I appreciate Senator Rubio's thoroughness in addressing these matters. The room remained quiet, waiting for her defense of her earlier claims. But Crockett seemed to be choosing her words very carefully now. While the senator has presented additional context for these events, I still believe there are legitimate concerns about the appearance of conflicts of interest during that administration. She paused, looking down at her notes. Susan passed her a small piece of paper with something written on it. Crockett glanced at it and continued. However, I acknowledge that the evidence presented today does not support the specific claim of corruption that I suggested earlier. Her voice was quieter now, almost reluctant. In the interest of fairness and truth, I want to correct the record on that point. A murmur ran through the gallery. This was not the fiery rebuttal many had expected. Instead, Crockett was walking back her most serious accusation. I remain committed to strong ethical standards in government, she added, quickly, and I will continue to advocate for transparency and accountability from all public officials, regardless of party. With that, she sat down, leaving more than half of her allotted time unused. Melissa looked surprised, while Susan nodded slightly, seemingly approving of Crockett's decision to concede rather than continue fighting a losing battle. Chairman Miller cleared his throat. Thank you, Representative. We will now hear from our panel of ethics experts as originally scheduled. As the new witnesses were sworn in, attention in the room had already shifted. Journalists were sending urgent updates to their editors, revising the stories they had prepared that morning. The narrative had completely changed. Nancy Walsh finished typing on her laptop and caught Rubio's eye across the room. The veteran reporter gave a small nod of professional respect. Rubio returned the gesture with a slight smile before turning his attention to the new panel. During the expert testimony, Crockett remained mostly silent, taking notes but asking few questions. Rubio, on the other hand, engaged actively with the witnesses, asking thoughtful questions about how ethics guidelines could be improved in the future. After another hour of testimony, Chairman Miller called a lunch break. As people began to file, out of the room a group of reporters surrounded Rubio in the hallway. Senator, were you surprised by Representative Crockett's retraction? One asked. Rubio considered his response carefully. I respect Representative Crockett for putting truth above politics. That takes courage and integrity. Do you think this ends the matter? Another reporter called out. I think this demonstrates the importance of focusing on facts rather than accusations, Rubio replied. The American people deserve that level of honesty from all of us in public service. Down another hallway, Crockett quickly moved toward her office. Surrounded by her, staff who formed a protective barrier against the press. She did not respond to questions called out to her. Inside her office, with the door firmly closed, Crockett dropped into her chair. That was a disaster, she said to Melissa and Susan, who stood nearby looking concerned. You made the right call. By acknowledging the evidence, Susan said firmly. Continuing to push claims that were clearly contradicted would have done more damage. But the news cycle, Crockett began. Will be bad today, Melissa admitted. But it would have been worse if you had doubled down. This way, you show that you care about truth more than scoring political points. Crockett nodded slowly, though she didn't look convinced. We should have verified everything more thoroughly before making such strong statements. Meanwhile, in a small conference room, Rubio met with Peter and Kyle to review what had happened. Unlike the tense atmosphere in Crockett's office, the mood here was calm and professional. You struck the right tone, Peter told Rubio. Focusing on evidence rather than attacking her personally was the right approach. Facts speak for themselves, Rubio replied simply. They always have more impact than accusations. Kyle handed Rubio a phone. The majority leader is calling. He wants to congratulate you. As Rubio took the call, televisions throughout the Capitol were already showing clips from the hearing. The chyrons running beneath the footage told the story. Crockett retracts corruption claims against Trump, and Rubio defends former president. With evidence. By early afternoon, the story had spread across news websites and social media. Political analysts were already discussing how this exchange might affect both politicians' futures. What had begun as Crockett's moment to shine had instead become a showcase for Rubio's methodical, evidence-based approach. As the committee prepared to reconvene for the afternoon session, the Capitol buzzed with conversation about what had transpired. The hearing that many had expected to be a routine partisan battle had instead become a powerful reminder about the importance of facts in political discourse. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the Capitol as the hearing reconvened. Many spectators who had left for lunch returned, bringing others with them who had heard about the morning's unexpected developments. The gallery was now completely full, with people standing along the back wall. Chairman Miller called the room to order and introduced the final panel of witnesses, ethics experts from various universities and think tanks. But everyone knew the real drama had already happened. The experts' testimony, while informative, couldn't match the intensity of the exchange between Rubio and Crockett. During this final session, Crockett remained notably quiet. She asked only one question of the panel, about improving transparency in government. Rubio, meanwhile, engaged actively with each witness, asking thoughtful questions about strengthening ethics guidelines without creating unnecessary bureaucracy. As the hearing neared its conclusion, Chairman Miller addressed the room. Before we adjourn, I want to thank all of our witnesses and committee members for their participation today. Senator Rubio and Representative Crockett, would either of you like to make brief closing remarks? Rubio nodded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. He stood and buttoned his suit jacket. Today's discussion reminds us that in our political system, evidence matters more than accusations. We can have strong disagreements about policy while still maintaining respect for facts and for each other. I hope we all take that lesson forward in our public discourse. He sat down, and all eyes turned to Crockett. There was a moment of tension as people wondered whether she would speak. Finally, she stood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she said, her voice steadier than it had been earlier. I agree with Senator Rubio that facts must guide our debates. I came here today with concerns that I believed were well-founded. Some of those concerns remain valid, particularly regarding the need for stronger ethics rules. She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. However, I also recognize that some of my specific claims were not supported by the complete evidence presented today. In politics, it can be difficult to acknowledge when we've overstated a case, but integrity requires us to do so. I appreciate the committee's work today and look forward to continuing discussions about strengthening our ethics standards. With that, she sat down. A murmur of surprise ran through the gallery. Few had expected such a direct acknowledgement. From Crockett, Chairman Miller thanked both of them and adjourned the hearing. As people began to file out, reporters rushed toward the exits, eager to file updated stories about Crockett's closing statement. In the hallway outside, Rubio spoke briefly with reporters. I want to express my respect for Representative Crockett's closing remarks, he said. It takes courage to acknowledge when the evidence doesn't support your position. That's something all of us in public service should be willing to do. When asked if he felt vindicated, Rubio shook his head. This isn't about winning or losing a debate. It's about ensuring that our political discussions are based on facts. The American people deserve nothing less. Several hallways away, Crockett made her way through a smaller group of reporters. I stand by my concerns about ethics in government, she told them. But I also believe in being honest about what the evidence shows. Today's hearing provided important context that deserves to be acknowledged. A reporter called out, "Will you continue to raise these issues in the future?" Crockett paused. "I will always advocate for transparency and ethical governance, but I will be more careful about verifying claims before making them publicly. That's my responsibility as a representative." By evening, the story had spread across all major news networks. Political analysts discussed the rare sight of a politician openly acknowledging an overstatement. Some praised Crockett's integrity, while others questioned whether the damage to her credibility could be repaired. On the evening news, Nancy Walsh's report began airing nationally. In a surprising turn of events on Capitol Hill today, what was expected to be a routine hearing became a powerful moment of political accountability, she reported, standing in front of the Capitol building. Representative Jasmine Crockett's accusations of corruption collapsed under the weight of evidence presented by Senator Marco Rubio, leading to a rare public acknowledgement of overstatement by a sitting member of Congress. The report showed clips from the hearing, including Rubio's methodical presentation of evidence and Crockett's eventual concession. Political observers note that today's exchange demonstrates both the dangers of making accusations without solid evidence and the importance of being willing to correct the record when faced with contradicting facts, Walsh continued. Later that evening in his Senate office, Rubio met with his senior staff to discuss the day's events. The office was quiet now, with most employees having gone home for the day. Peter and Kyle sat across from Rubio, reviewing media coverage on their tablets. The reaction has been overwhelmingly positive, Peter reported. Even commentators who typically oppose our positions are acknowledging that you handled this well. What about Crockett? Rubio asked. How is she being treated in the coverage? Kyle scrolled through several news sites. Mixed. Some are criticizing her for making the claims in the first place, but many are giving her credit for acknowledging her mistake. Her closing statement is getting a lot of positive attention. Rubio nodded. Good. This shouldn't be about destroying her politically. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we respond to them. Meanwhile, in her office in the House wing, Crockett sat with Melissa and Susan, also reviewing the day's coverage. The mood was somber, but not defeated. The next few days will be rough, Susan admitted. But your closing statement changed the narrative. Instead of just being about your mistake, it's now also about your integrity and acknowledging it. Crockett sighed. I should have been more careful from the beginning. We relied too much on partial information and didn't anticipate how thoroughly Rubio would be prepared. There's a lesson there, Melissa said quietly. We need to verify everything more carefully before making public accusations, especially ones as serious as corruption. Crockett nodded. A lesson I won't forget. She looked at a notification on her phone. The speaker wants to meet with me tomorrow morning. That's actually a good sign, Susan noted. He wouldn't bother if he thought this was the end of your political career. He probably wants to help you navigate the aftermath. As night fell over Washington, both politicians prepared for what would come next. For Rubio, the day's events had strengthened his position and demonstrated his command of policy details. For Crockett, it had been a painful but important lesson in political accountability. The next morning's newspapers carried headlines that told the story. Evidence trumps accusations in Capitol Hill showdown, and Rubio effectively rebuts corruption, claims with facts, and Crockett acknowledges overstatement in rare moment of political accountability. One editorial summarized the impact of the hearing. In an era when political figures rarely admit mistakes, yesterday's hearing offered a refreshing if unexpected moment of truth. Senator Rubio's methodical presentation of evidence and Representative Crockett's eventual acknowledgement of overstatement remind us that facts still matter in our political discourse. Perhaps the most important outcome wasn't about either politician, personally, but about the principle that evidence should guide our debates, not the other way around. The hearing that had begun with accusations and tension had ended with an important lesson about political integrity. For both Rubio and Crockett, it would shape their public images and approaches moving forward, and for those who had witnessed, it served as a powerful reminder about the enduring importance of truth in public service.